When I first started this channel and started talking about Social Security, I had a lot of my colleagues shaking their heads. And some of them even asked me, Devin, why are you spending so much time on this? People with money aren't worried about Social Security. But pretty quickly, I found out that that wasn't true at all. In fact, some of the most financially successful retirees I've worked with were even more concerned about getting their Social Security decision right. And that makes sense too, because those of you who are in that group, you're not boxed in by needing the check right now. You have flexibility, you have choices, and that makes the decision even more important, not less important. For you, the question isn't when can I file, it's when should I file to get the most strategic value from this benefit. Because when you don't need the money on day one of retirement, you have the opportunity to be strategic. You can use timing to reduce taxes, manage investment withdrawals, and even strengthen your long-term plan. So, in this video, we're going to walk through how millionaire retirees should think about Social Security. We'll cover why the decision is more important than most people realize and how to use this benefit as part of a smart, coordinated retirement income strategy. Now, there's a lot to consider here. I have a webinar where I usually talk for about an hour, and that doesn't even cover everything. But what I want to do today is to give you a clear framework that you can use to start shaping your own decision. So, at a very high level, it all starts with one question. What's your primary goal with Social Security? Because depending on what matters most to you, your ideal filing strategy could look very different. For some of you, the top priority is making sure you take care of your spouse. You want to make sure that if something happens to you, that they're left with a higher form of guaranteed income. Now, that's an emotional decision, but also a very strategic one, and it should absolutely factor into when you file. For others, the focus is on building a solid foundation of guaranteed income. You want to know that no matter what happens in the market or in the economy, a big portion of your income is locked in for life. So for you, Social Security isn't just a benefit, it's a tool for stability. And then there are those who want a full comprehensive plan that connects Social Security with withdrawals, taxes, and even Roth conversions. You don't want to just make a good decision. You want to make the best decision based on all the moving pieces of your retirement plan working together. So those are the three priorities that we're going to walk through in this video. And just know they're not mutually exclusive. Your filing strategy can absolutely include elements of all three. So let's dive into each of those and look at how your answer can shape the right age to file. Now, the first two are fairly straightforward. And then the last decision gets a little more complicated, but don't worry. We're going to try to break this down and make this easy to understand for purposes of this video. So, let's start with the first priority when you're making this decision, and that is protecting a surviving spouse. Now, we could go way down the rabbit hole here, diving into all the technical rules around Social Security survivor benefits, the widow's limit, and a few other complexities. But at its core, this decision is pretty straightforward. If your household has one person who was the higher earner, then the longer that person waits to file, the higher the benefit that gets left behind to the surviving spouse. And that's because of the way that survivor benefits are calculated. So for a married couple, when both are receiving benefits and one spouse dies, the lower benefit drops off and the higher benefit stays. So if you're the higher earner, your filing age directly impacts how much your spouse would receive if you pass away first. But this isn't just a math problem. This is where you need to step back, look at the big picture, and start crunching some real numbers. Because before you can really evaluate which filing age makes sense, you have to answer a couple of key questions. And the first is, how much income will your surviving spouse actually need? Now, the rule of thumb says 75 to 85% of the income that you're collecting as a couple. But if you know me, you know how I feel about rules of thumb. They're okay for a quick estimate and a rough guideline, but they often miss the details that really matter. So yes, expenses usually go down after the death of a spouse. There's one less person to feed, fewer travel expenses, potentially lower healthcare or insurance costs, but the exact amount depends entirely on your lifestyle, your spending habits, and which of you passes away first. So I recommend doing something simple but very powerful. Set up two versions of your retirement budget. One for when you're both alive and one for after a death. So it may turn into three versions. One if you die, one if your spouse dies, and then one if you both are alive. You can just write it out on a notepad. What really matters here is that you get clear on what changes and what doesn't after a death. So, for example, a lot of my clients spend a good chunk of their retirement budget on travel, but sometimes only one spouse is really into traveling. The other spouse just tags along to be a good sport, but they'd probably rather be at home. And some of you right now are said, "Yep, that's me." So, what happens if the travel loving spouse passes away first? The spouse that's left behind likely isn't going to continue to travel, and that entire expense might disappear. Now, that kind of adjustment can have a real impact on what your surviving spouse needs to continue living comfortably. But once you go through this budget and you have that number, your best estimate of what your spouse will need, you have to ask the next question. How much of that income should come from guaranteed sources? In other words, what's more important to you for that spouse who may continue to live after you die? Is it better to leave behind a larger portfolio that they can draw from? Or is it better to secure the highest possible guaranteed income stream through benefits like Social Security? Because filing early or filing later will change the balance of those two. So, if you delay, you're creating a larger monthly benefit for your spouse, but you're also likely spending down more of your investment accounts in the meantime. And if you file early, you may preserve more assets, but the guaranteed income you leave behind could be a bit smaller. And this is why survivor benefit testing has to be part of the conversation. It's not necessarily the deciding factor unless there's a known health issue, but it should absolutely be included in your planning as a stress test. If something happens to the higher earner early in retirement, what happens next? Will the plan still work? Will your surviving spouse be okay? That's the kind of clarity you want before you file. Not just how the numbers look when things go perfectly, but how the plan holds up if life takes a different turn. Now, let's talk about the second priority, maximizing guaranteed income. A lot of people really like the idea of building a guaranteed floor of income in retirement. In fact, for some, the goal is to get that floor to match their basic living expenses. That way, all of the essentials like housing, groceries, utilities, and healthcare are covered no matter what the market is doing. Then any extra or discretionary spending like travel, gifts, or hobbies can come from savings. Now, others don't necessarily draw that hard line between essential and discretionary spending. They just like the idea of getting as much as they can from guaranteed sources. So for them, that predictable, reliable income helps to reduce worry and give them more peace of mind, and it makes life feel a little bit less stressful. So whichever camp you're in, this is where Social Security becomes really important as a piece of that big puzzle because unlike your portfolio, Social Security is a check that shows up every month for as long as you live. And the longer you wait to file up until age 70 at least, the bigger that check becomes. So, if your goal is to maximize guaranteed income, the answer is pretty straightforward. You wait to file. Now, that doesn't mean that the decision is automatic or that you shouldn't look deeper, though. When you're thinking purely about guaranteed income, Social Security is one of the best tools you have. Again, it's not going to fluctuate with the market or interest rates. It's not subject to sequence of returns risk. It's stable, and that kind of stability is exactly what a lot of retirees are looking for. And that's why so many calculators, articles, and so-called Social Security strategies have focused on one central question. How do you get the most from Social Security? And no matter how many ways they try to frame it, the answer is usually the same. Delay filing, preferably to age 70. Now, let me be clear. I do think that's a valid point to consider, and that's why we built the free break-even calculator on our website. It gets hundreds of users every day, and it's designed to show you which filing age will likely result in the highest total lifetime Social Security payments. And that's useful data to know too. But I've always made it clear both on that page where I have the calculator and in my planning conversations that this should never, ever, ever be the only factor you use to make your decision. Social Security absolutely does not exist in a vacuum. You have to weigh it against your other income sources, your savings, your tax, and your overall retirement timeline. So again, if building a strong floor of guaranteed income is your priority, Social Security should absolutely play a central role, and waiting to file often helps increase that floor and build it higher. Just don't forget that this is one piece of the bigger plan. It's not always the right move in every scenario, but it is a great starting point when that guaranteed income is on the top of your priority list. And the third priority is probably the most comprehensive of all, and that's creating a coordinated plan that brings Social Security, taxes, withdrawals, and long term care goals all into alignment to get all of those gears turning together. Because if you're like a lot of the retirees I work with, you're not just looking for a good decision, you're looking for the best decision, the one that works across your entire financial life. And this is where things start to get more complex, but also more rewarding. You know, when you coordinate your filing strategy with your other income sources, you can potentially lower your tax bill or extend the life of your portfolio or create a smoother, more efficient retirement income plan. And here's what I mean by coordination. Let's say that you're in your early to mid 60s. You haven't filed for Social Security yet, and you're drawing some income from your IRA or your brokerage account. The timing of your Social Security benefit impacts how much you need to withdraw from your investments, what your taxable income looks like, whether Roth conversions make sense, how much of your Social Security benefit will be taxed, and even your future Medicare premiums. Every decision you make has a ripple effect. And that's especially true when it comes to when you file for Social Security. Delaying Social Security often opens up what I like to call a tax planning window, and that's the gap between when you retire and when you start to receive required minimum distributions or Social Security, and sometimes there's some crossover there. So, filing for Social Security can still be efficient, but sometimes you need to delay it because during that window, you might be able to take some strategic action, like doing Roth conversions at lower tax rates or smoothing out your taxable income over time. I've seen clients reduce their lifetime tax liability by six figures just by using this window effectively. And Social Security timing plays a key role in making that window as valuable as possible. So, if your goal is full optimization and you want to align everything from guaranteed income to the withdrawal strategy to tax planning, then you can't look at Social Security in isolation. It's a critical piece, but it has to be connected everything else. This is why the right strategy is often a blend of all of this that we've talked about. You might delay benefits to strengthen survivor income while also running Roth conversions to manage future tax brackets, and then still ensure that you have enough guaranteed income to feel secure. And that's the beauty of having flexibility. You're not boxed in, which means that you can design a plan that works for you, not just in theory, but in real life. So, if you're someone who has built a substantial portfolio of retirement, don't make the mistake of thinking Social Security is just a side note. The more flexibility you have, the more important this decision becomes. And whether your top priority is protecting your spouse, building guaranteed income, or creating a fully integrated retirement strategy, the way you file will have a lasting impact. What I hope this video has shown you is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The right filing age isn't just about maximizing a monthly check. It's about aligning this benefit with your bigger goals, your tax, your income needs, and the overall long-term plan. And that's what I want for you, a decision made with clarity and confidence, one that fits your life and not someone else's rules of thumb. So let's call it a day. Thank you so much for watching.